Hello, my name is Charles Argoff, and I'm a professor of neurology at Albany Medical College and director of the Comprehensive Pain Center at Albany Medical Center in Albany, New York. Welcome to our program entitled Putting Patients First, Developing Abuse-Deterrent Opioids. I'm joined here today by my good friend and colleague, Mike Brennan. Dr. Brennan?
Thank you, Charles. I'm Mike Brennan. I'm the Medical Director and Chief Medical Officer of the Pain Center of Fairfield in Fairfield, Connecticut. I'm also Associate Medical Director for the Chronic Pain and Recovery Center at the Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan, Connecticut. This Pain Matters program was developed by Teva Pharmaceuticals, and both Dr. Argoff and I have been compensated by Teva to give this presentation. This presentation is the second in a series you can find on painmatters.com. In the previous video, Dr. Argoff, Dr. Jeffrey Gooden, and I discussed the need for healthcare professionals, patients, government, and industry to work together in addressing opioid abuse.
We also introduced the idea that abuse-deterrent opioid formulations may play a part in helping to mitigate abuse.
Here you can see several indices showing that after a peak in 2010, rates of abuse and diversion have begun to decrease. These data are from a January 2015 article in the New England Journal of Medicine, authored by Dr. Richard Dart, the Executive Director of Researched Abuse, Diversion, and Addiction-Related Surveillance, or RADARS. This data is encouraging, but we need to continue our collective efforts to address this issue. Let's now focus on abuse-deterrent opioid formulations and why and how they might have an impact.
The two objectives of this program are to provide an overview of the 2015 FDA guidance for industry on the evaluation of abuse-deterrent opioids and to discuss the potential impact of abuse-deterrent opioid formulations.
Several approaches to developing abuse-deterrent opioids have been identified, including physical and chemical barriers, agonist-antagonist combinations, aversion approaches, delivery systems, new molecular entities, prodrug formulations, combination approaches, and novel approaches. Physical and chemical barriers make it harder to extract the drug in an immediate release form. This includes resistance to extraction by chewing, crushing, as well as via chemical solvents. Agonist-antagonist combinations release an antagonist only when the medication is taken in a way other than intended, mitigating some of the effects of the opioid. If a patient is taking the medication as directed, the antagonist has no effect. Aversion technologies result in an unpleasant sensation when the formulation is manipulated or taken in excess. With delivery systems, we could think of sustained-release depot injectables that might be harder to manipulate. New molecular entities and prodrugs might require enzymatic activation, resulting in different receptor binding profiles or decreased CNS penetration. You could also combine some of these methods, potentially benefiting from additional barriers provided by multiple technologies. Finally, novel approaches or technologies may become evident as abuse-deterrent opioids evolve in the future.
In April 2015, the FDA published a guidance document which provides recommendations to industry on the type of studies that should be conducted to demonstrate a formulation's abuse-deterrent properties. It also outlines how such studies will be evaluated and implications for the product's package insert.
You can see why these studies are so important, not only for industry, but also for healthcare providers. There are 4 types of studies that have been identified. The first 3 are pre-market, that is, prior to approval, and the 4th is post-market. They are all outlined here. I'm going to review these categories with a focus on why these may be relevant to us as clinicians. Why conduct a Category 1 study? These are laboratory manipulation and extraction studies, and they're conducted to see how easily the formulation can be manipulated under in vitro conditions that an abuser might attempt. For example, these studies can evaluate how easily the formulation can be crushed or ground using readily available items like spoons, pill cutters, and coffee grinders. The ease of extracting the opioid from the formulation using commonly available solvents like water, ethanol, vinegar, acetone, and mineral spirits should also be evaluated. Importantly, Route-specific data is also sought based on how the opioid molecule is likely to be abused. For example, for a drug that is often abused by snorting, you'd want to look at particle size distribution for a drug. However, for a drug that's more likely to be injected, syringeability and injectability are important parameters to evaluate.
With Category 2 studies, we're really focusing on the in vivo pharmacokinetic profiles of the intact and manipulated drug formulation. These studies look at the rate of rise of drug concentration as well as peak concentration and the time to peak concentration. The effect of food and alcohol on systemic exposure to the drug can also be evaluated as part of a Category 2 study and help inform how subsequent abuse potential studies might be conducted. These studies also collect information on adverse events following manipulation, again, providing us with more information to help us make better informed decisions on behalf of our patients.
Category 3 studies are conducted under controlled settings to assess the impact of the formulation on measures that predict how much the drug will be liked by abusers. The preferred design is a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, and positive-controlled crossover study in non-dependent drug-experienced abusers who are not currently seeking or participating in treatment for drug abuse. A pre-qualification phase is used to ensure the subjects can distinguish between placebo and an immediate-release version of the opioid drug without abuse-deterrent features. These studies focus on the difference in Emax, the maximum pharmacodynamic response, among the positive control, placebo, and the potentially abuse-deterrent formulation.
It's also important that these studies be conducted for relevant routes of abuse for that opioid molecule at doses that are known to produce high levels of liking in opioid-experienced abusers. When evaluating the intranasal route, both the abuse-deterrent opioid formulation and comparator study drug should be produced with similar particle size distribution. With the intravenous route, it is recommended that a solution for injection is prepared using commercially available products that are safe for IV administration. The amount of the opioid used is based on in vitro extraction studies of the manipulated formulation. We also need to consider the scales used to assess drug liking. Here you see a bipolar visual analog scale, or VAS. Higher values are associated with greater liking, while low scores indicate less liking. The profile of mood states, or POMS, is also used to measure these subjective responses. A bipolar VAS for drug liking is recommended as the primary measure for the study and appears to correlate most directly with the potential of that formulation to be abused, but there are other measures you can evaluate. These measures of interest include an assessment of overall drug liking, good effects, for example, euphoria, bad effects, for example, adverse events, and the likelihood to take that drug again. It's also important to evaluate how the intact and manipulated formulations differ in terms of onset, peak duration of activity, and offset.
Let's imagine for a moment an opioid with abuse-deterrent properties has just been approved by the FDA, and you as a clinician want to start thinking about when this particular medication is appropriate. The information in the package insert can help clinicians make better informed choices regarding the use of that particular formulation. Here you see several examples of possible statements based on study results. It's important to note that a claim refers not only to the category of studies conducted, but also under which circumstances the product has been shown to potentially deter abuse. For example, the claim may specify if the product exhibits properties that are expected to deter abuse via oral, intravenous, and/or intranasal routes.
Our final example is for a product that has been on the market for some time and has real-world post-market data available. Formal Category 4 studies are designed to determine if the formulation results in lower levels of abuse compared with non-deterrent formulations. These studies need to be either nationally representative or cover a large geographic area. They should also evaluate overall as well as route-specific abuse and abuse-deterrent properties. Not surprisingly, data from all 4 study categories may be needed for such a claim, which lets clinicians know that this formulation has been shown to reduce abuse in the community.
We know that opioids remain an important treatment option, but their benefits need to be weighed against their potential for misuse and abuse. We've established that collaborative efforts have resulted in decreased abuse and diversion of prescription opioids, and that abuse-deterrent opioid formulations may further augment these efforts. We've also discussed how opioids with abuse-deterrent properties can be evaluated and what their potential might be to further mitigate prescription opioid abuse. By looking at the information in an abuse-deterrent opioids package insert, clinicians can get an idea of the testing that the product has undergone, but we still need to evaluate the studies and data for each product to help us determine which product might be most appropriate for our patients. The introduction of these new formulations is exciting, but only time will tell if abuse-deterrent opioid formulations will be the next standard in patient care. On behalf of Charles, myself, and Teva Pharmaceuticals, we hope you enjoyed the program and thank you for your time. If you haven't already, please take a look at other videos and information on responsible opioid prescribing and register for updates on www.painmatters.com.